Bonjour, my brethren, DigiWiz here. Welcome back to Project Aperture, Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. Yes, I'm very original with titles. In this part of the series, the electronics are going to be secured into the portal gun and be working more or less, hopefully. And there will actually be a portal gun for the electronics to sit in. God praise me. With that stuff out of the way, on with the video. To begin with, I wanted to expand on the circuit created in the last video. The only thing it did was switch between orange and blue with a single button, but we can't have that because that's baby portal gun. That's bad portal gun. That's unoriginal portal gun. I wanted a firing indicator and separate buttons for both portals so that if you press button 1, it fires blue, and if you press button 2, it fires orange. That's good. That's how you be poggers. So, for the firing indicator, I wanted the NeoPixel to light up brighter when the button to shoot a portal is pressed, cause that's cool, and I'm cool. To do this, your boy gotta do some animating. But I am a very small brain man who doesn't know how to do cool animations like this. So I basically just made an animation made of 3 color wipes, which went from the base portal color to a brighter version, then dimmed down to the original color. It's a basic thing, but it gets the job done. To get the brighter versions of the colors, I used the same method I did to get the base colors, which was getting the raw hex values of the colors, and plugging those into an online hex to RGB color converter, and the values that spat out could then be used by the NeoPixels because they use specifically RGB values, which is 0 to 255 for the red, green, and blue. The only change to this method I made was just slightly brightening the values, which seemed to work a treat. This seemed the most acceptable solution. I implemented the code into the main portal gun sketch using my big brain coding powers, and to my delight, it freaking worked like a charm. To further affirm that I am biggest brainus, God kill me, I tested this function on the rest of the portal gun colors: Shell's orange and blue, Atlas's cyan and purple, as well as Peabody's orange and red. These also worked just as expected, which sent me over the bloody moon, I tell you. The next thing I wanted to try and do was have separate buttons for the primary and secondary portal colors to have control over which portal is fired. Connecting the second button was same as the first, digital to digital and ground to ground. Then when writing the code, I just added the extra pin variable, as well as another input pull-up, so the Arduino can actually use that button. To be able to have both buttons have a function, I use digital read, which basically just reads the state of something, inside an if statement to detect if the button is pressed, and if that is true, play the firing animation. Then took it for a test drive, and that worked very well with one button shooting the primary color, which was blue, and the other button shooting the secondary color, which was orange, which was exactly what I wanted to happen, which was what I was so psyched about. I already had done all I wanted for the basics electronic circuit minus the sound. Speaking of sound, let's talk about that next. The Arduino Uno cannot really play sound by itself due to having a condition called being stupid, and also its small space with it being only a few kilobytes large, which is mega cringe. God, I'm trying with these jokes. Fucking kill me. I found a module on the internet called the DF Player Mini, which uses an SD card slot to store large amounts of sound files to use in your projects. There's something interesting in the left-hand side of the pinout, however, because that has all the data pins and pins for the speaker. Going through the pins from top to bottom, There's the VCC, which connects to your 5-volt power. Or you may be able to use 3.3 volts, I'm not really sure. The RX and TX pins connect to any two digital pins on your board. And the SPK1 and SPK2 pins always stand for speaker 1 and speaker 2. And they're to be connected to your speaker with SPK1 connected to the negative terminal on the speaker, and SPK2 being connected to the positive terminal on the speaker. The last pin is the ground pin, which is pretty self-explanatory. The RX pin requires a 10k ohm resistor, which I think makes it so the sound doesn't, so like the speaker doesn't sound like absolute shit. I then waited a week and the components arrived on the DigiWiz doorstep. The best doorstep in the world. If you question me on it, you're going to disappear. When I saw the ground pin on the Mini, I suddenly saw I had made a severe lapse in my judgment. The Arduino Uno only has 3 ground pins, but the device/components that use ground are NeoPixels, 2 buttons, and the DF Player Mini. With this revelation, I knew I needed a solution because I still needed the second button for the primary and secondary firing. To solve this, I did my first daisy chain, I think, ever, by routing the ground wire from the first button to its terminal and through the 2 terminals on the second button to create technically 1 full wire. The digital pins stayed the same because, there's about 13 of the feckers on there, so I'm not really going to be running out of them anytime soon. Luckily, everything still worked, which, of course, I knew because I'm very smart. Now, on to actually pushing the sound on the module. I first coded up a test for the module, which like all problems, can be solved by quickly Googling it. To get it to work, I first needed a couple of libraries. One was the software serial library, which allowed the DF Player Mini to communicate with the Arduino. Then a library called the DF Robot library, which allowed me to do things like set the volume and then play sounds from the DF Player module to the speaker. I then copied the files for the 2 portal gun firing sounds from my phone, which I had saved from a year ago, onto my computer, which I think I got from fucking game ripping website where I ripped the sounds from the game. I don't really care. I just cared that I had the portal gun sounds. And those got loaded onto an 8GB SD card. Yes, that is overkill, and no, I do not feel bad about it. So pop that SD card into the Mini, and soldered the wires to the speaker by ripping apart a male to female jumper cable, which, to be honest, sounds more violent than it actually was, and soldered those into their respective terminals. Oh, and behold, the sound bloody worked. When the basic circuit was essentially complete, which made me so gosh damn happy, since this idea was just a fantasy in my mind from over 3 years ago, and actually see it coming together was super frickin' poggers. If you're loving the progress of the portal gun as much as I am, be sure to absolutely atomize that sub and like button if you want to see more electronic videos like this. With the basic circuit done, I can now finalize the rest of the components. For the final lineup for the portal gun's electronics, these are my decisions. An Arduino Uno as the brains behind the operation, bog standard shop-bought power bank which just barely covers the task I needed to do with 5 volts output voltage and 1 amp of continuous current being supplied. Orange and blue LED panel mounted push buttons for the portal firing, and a 4 ohm 3-watt speaker for delivering them fatty beats to my eardrums, and finally 55 freaking NeoPixel LEDs. That is a lot of light. When God said, "Let there be light," I don't think he meant that much light. I've had to blink my eyes a few times after testing just to clear my vision because those mofos are so bloody bright. Yikes. The parts I hadn't yet secured, such as the remaining LEDs and the push buttons, I promptly ordered off of various sellers and then undertook the task which took most of my sleep from me: 3D printing the portal gun itself. Unfortunately, the white shell parts are the only pieces I printed from my initial endeavor to make this darn thing. And why is that a problem, you may ask? It's a problem because all the other pieces take a minimum 10 hours, which isn't really great for a guy who A, goes to school for 8 hours a day, and B, needs 8 hours of sleep, which can kind of be impeded by mechanical rollers winding back and forth. So I devised a plan, albeit like all of my plans, a very flawed one. Get up at 6 in the morning to start the print, and it'll be finished before I normally go to bed, which means happy days for everyone, right? Oh, how wrong I was to assume that it would be anything but simple. For some idiotic reason, when printing the first part of the generator, this is the part that holds the electronics. It takes 15 hours, by the way, just in case you're wondering. Octoprint just stopped printing at 6 hours in, meaning I had to reprint the whole thing, which meant sitting through the entire night, listening to the grinding, whirring, and other noises associated with 3D printers. My sleep schedule was suffering tremendously. But, I mean, look, I'm on the Sigma Male grind set, you know? Yeah, sure. It's the printer being sus, not me. No, not at all. Just had to keep reminding myself how much all this work was going to pay off just to keep my sanity. The rest of the parts finished without other similar complications, thankfully. But I will need to glue together the generator as it can't stay together otherwise. By this point, the other electronics had arrived. Dun dun dun. I was out at the time when they were delivered, and I literally saw the delivery van as it was driving down to my house. But errands are errands, and they have to be done. And I finally got home. I tore open that bag like a spoiled rich kid at Christmas. And there was everything I needed: buttons and neopixels. I immediately consensually robbed old brother DigiWiz of his soldering kit and went to work on the components. Things were actually going pretty good until I got to the second neopixel stick, because somehow, still not sure how, a bit of solder got on the top of the PCB, and so this huge ass soldering tip. I tried getting the solder off, but it also ended up desoldering an SMD component that was on the neopixel. I freaking freaked out and immediately powered down the soldering iron. And therefore for the component, since it flew away in a random direction. Yeah, because that's how physics works. That's how Newton says that physics works anyway. After finding it nowhere, I decided to try to find an order replacement part. So I took to the NeoPixel Uber guide. Thank you, NeoPixel Uber guide. You have served me very well in this endeavor, which is details on the PCB for each major NeoPixel type, which thankfully gave me the information I was looking for. The component that got dislodged was a capacitor which had a capacitance of 100 nanofarads. I breathed a sigh of relief that I didn't have to get a whole new stick of NeoPixels, because those shits are expensive. At least expensive for my budget. I thought to myself, I might as well get a finer soldering tip while I'm ordering. So I also ordered myself a conical soldering tip of 0.25mm diameter, which would serve me well for soldering the finer pads of the other NeoPixels, and God, it was a lifesaver. During the weekend, while waiting for the capacitor and soldering tip to arrive, I decided to mess around with the portal gun code a bit to try and make it do cool things, because good things always happen when you mess around with electronics and code. I wanted the portal gun to have an idle animation, so that if after firing a portal, the portal gun would go into an idle animation of pulsating LEDs if the button wasn't pressed for 5 minutes, which I thought looked pretty cool. First started my journey, as I always do, looking for someone to plagiarize. There are many minutes or hours, I can't keep track, scouring Google, found a whole list of animations, which I found on a site called Tweaking for All. Link in description for those who want to have a look. Took a bit of tweaking to get the NeoPixels displaying the animation I wanted, which was a sliding light effect, which sufficed enough, didn't need anything really overtly complicated. Once that was done, I suddenly realized I had no idea as to how to make an idle animation in Arduino. My basic understanding of the concept is, if button 1 or button 2 is pressed, shoot the corresponding portal color. If neither button has been pressed for X seconds or minutes, execute the code for the idle animation. I set out on my chronology quest and came across a timer that looked pretty good at first glance, would suffice enough. But when diving into the code, it was a bit more advanced for moi, and I had mixed results with it, so I decided to go back to basics with using Arduino's millis function, which you can use for timers and all types of cool stuff. What I was more interested in is using an interrupt, i.e. a button press, which would then reset the timer. This was exactly what I needed. All I had was a simple if statement that would check if the timer had exceeded or was equal to the set time. I did 10 seconds for easy testing. If the timer had exceeded or was equal to the set time, it checked to see if button 1 or button 2 was pushed. If not, the timer would keep going. If button 1 or button 2 was pushed, however, the portal fire code would run and the timer would reset. To tend to the button interrupt, I added the if statement to check stuff by the timer. Then to account for the buttons as well, I added an and or operators into the if statement, so the code is checking for the button state of button 1 or button 2, and also checking to see if the timer has elapsed or is equal to the set time. This worked beautifully. After 10 seconds, once the button was pushed, the NeoPixels would start the idle animation. Then realized I actually had no way of turning the portal gun off, because the power bank will be enclosed in the generator, which is screwed onto the back shell of the portal gun. It would be very cumbersome if in the middle of Comic-Con I had to disassemble my portal gun just to turn it off. It would be very inconvenient. To fix this, I decided to neglect the idle animation and instead implement a power saving feature of sorts, which after the elapsed time defined in the code elapses, NeoPixels would turn off, saving a large amount of power, allowing me to use the portal gun for longer, which I think is pretty gosh darn poggers. It just made more sense to me to do, because the power bank can only last so long and would last longer if it wasn't on all the bleeding time. But the code wasn't done quite yet. Oh, you think that I was done, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, we haven't even started yet. After all this, the replacement capacitors and a new soldering tip had arrived, and I couldn't be happier. It was so good. I could finally get back to work. To begin, I resoldered the capacitor back onto the NeoPixel stick and then went to work on soldering the copper pads for your digital in, ground, and 5-volt power. The first set worked out great, but the other set got pretty badly burnt, which was such a letdown. So cringe. There was still a way out though, to have all the LEDs functioning as they should. I just had to combine the wires for all the LEDs into one singular wire for the ground, data in, and the 5-volt power. That'll be so much fun to do. I then soldered the wires onto the ring and jewel. No, not that type of jewel. Get your mind out of the gutter, you. And those worked extremely well, which I was happy with. Then soldered the orange and blue buttons. I then tried printing the generator hash with holes for the 2 buttons, but guess what? My Ender 3 actually hates me and despises my very existence. Because, I don't know, reasons. Because instead of printing it all perfect and great and just, it suddenly realised it was in a post-COVID world where everything's not great, and decided to have a huge layer shift during the print, so I had to hack away at the holes with a Dremel just so the grip and the buttons would bloody fit, and they didn't even fit properly. So I'm going to glue them on anyway. With that somber note, this concludes part 2 of Project Aperture numero 2. We are in the end game now. All the electronics, 3D printing, and coding are complete essentially. Just gotta mash them all together, and hopefully we'll have a pretty sick looking portal gun if I do say so myself. If you want to see me assemble the portal gun though, before Project Aperture Part 3 comes out and the trilogy comes to a close, be sure to keep an eye on the DigiWiz YouTube channel because I'll be live streaming the whole thing, so be sure to get over there when that's going on because it'll be really cool. You'll get to see me turn it on for the first time and see if it blows up or not. That's always great. There's a GitHub page down in the description for all you nerds where you can find the code for the portal gun and the final wiring schematic I've made for the portal gun. I've also put a parts list in the description as well with accompanying links. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, my brethren. Be sure to again like, comment, and subscribe so you know when part 3 of Project Aperture drops. With that, I bid you all au revoir, my brethren. Good night.